on we are live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. I'm just waiting on LinkedIn, and we can just wait a few more minutes for so people have enough time to drop in as well. And I'm gonna start recording. Cool. It seems that we are live, which is
All
awesome.
right.
It's working.
Hello, everyone. This is your co-host, Hans Chen from FAB9. I'm here with my co-host, Bernardo, and we have two wonderful guests tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much,
Greetings.
Simon and Locke. I'm just taking a minute here to wrap up the setup of the live streaming right now. I'm setting up the chat so people can talk to us as well.
So this is show and tell, first Friday. Bernardo and I, we usually talk to a few guests. Before coronavirus, we will run this inside the makerspace in Footscray. Because of COVID-19, we have moved this event online. And so if you're joining us from your home, welcome. Please do get a drink or two, a soda. We'll get started very soon. So show and tell again is a very grassroots event. We do not have, I guess, time limits. This is not a pitch. We usually talk to our guests and try to find out their stories, what inspires them, what makes them do what they do, and we want the community to interact with us. So today we're trying out a new kind of live streaming platform, so it's more of a broadcast. But we do have sorry, it's not Twitch, it's Discord, right?
Yeah,
Can
that's
people ask us questions on Discord? I think they can.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Hans. I've just finished the setup here. We are currently live on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, LinkedIn, and I think that's it. That's quite a lot of different places.
Awesome.
So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much for Simon and Locke. Thanks so much, guys, for joining. And it's great to see everyone that's currently watching us right now. You can see a lot of eyeballs on YouTube and Facebook as well. So we're just trying a different format here. In a world pre-COVID, we'll be hosting this event live. We'll be at the makerspace, probably having a beer, a few drinks, eating some pizza, and just have a nice chat. It'd be a really informal conversation. However, due to the current circumstances, we had to go 100% online, and we were hosting these events in Zoom rooms. But the rooms were getting quite packed. My internet wasn't cooperating at all. We had a bit of a headache to host this kind of stuff. So we decided to broadcast. Since we are not sure exactly which channel is the best one, we're streaming into 4 different channels. And if you're watching us right now, just make sure to drop a comment. If you're on YouTube, just drop a comment there. If you're on LinkedIn or Facebook, just let us know that you're there. I can see how many eyeballs we have here. That's quite a lot, but it'd be nice to hear that you guys are over there as well. And if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat. And as soon as we finish our conversations, we're gonna start asking questions as well. The format for tonight is what we call a fireside chat. Hans and I will be the hosts, and we will have Simon and Locke going through a very informal conversation. And the objective here is really to unpack the motivations and the interests behind Simon's and Locke's histories. Do you want to say anything, Hans?
No, I think that's it. So about 20 minutes, kind of fireside chat, followed by about 10 minutes Q&A. So please do engage with us on whichever platform you're on. If Bernardo's speaking, I'll be try to monitor to see comments and vice versa. So if we don't get to your questions straight away, don't worry, we will get to your questions. So in total, it's going to be approximately 1 hour. Again, we have a Discord channel as well, and Discord channel is always open. You can join us on Discord throughout the whole month. And as soon as we can go back to the makerspace, we hope that we can open up more for, people can just talk about what they're making. rather than just being scheduled. But I hope you will enjoy tonight's show. I think this is actually quite exciting. Hopefully people can actually tune in from overseas. Let's see if people are tuning in from Asia Pacific. So today's Friday, so happy Friday. Okay, so over to you, Bernardo. Please take it.
Thanks, Hans. Thank you so much. Yeah, as Hans mentioned, Hans and I, we are part of FAB9, and it's great to be here. It's great to have Simon and Locke here. Definitely the one thing that I miss the most from working at the Makerspace is meeting interesting people, getting to know these interesting stories, and just checking what people are working on. And I think that's at least one day throughout the month that we know that we're going to meet interesting people here and hear interesting stories. So without further ado, I want to introduce you guys to Simon Mildren. He is the co-founder, or just founder, I reckon, and CEO from Hive Keepers. Right. And he's working on a fantastic project. I'm fascinated by beehives myself. I've been nerding and geeking out quite a lot throughout this week. But I'd love to hear from you, Simon. So can you just introduce yourself to the crowd out there?
Yeah, pleasure to be here, and thanks very much for the opportunity. So as you've heard, my name's Simon Mildren. I'm the CEO and head beekeeper for Hive Keepers. And at Hive Keepers, we're smart enabling beehives. And there's a lot that goes on behind that. It's more than just smart enabling beehives, but I suppose that's the part that often interests people, and they think, how do you tech enable beehives? And that's something that we're fascinated with as well, and where we're spending a lot of our time and focus at the moment, along with matters relating to the supply chain of honey, because there's a lot of issues in the supply chain of honey. Yeah. So we're working with industry partners to solve some of those problems. I suppose that gives you just the quick version of sort of what we're up to, but I can elaborate and go into as much detail as you like.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. I could see that you guys have you guys seem to be an omni-channel for beehive-related solutions, right? When we met, I had the impression that you're working on IoT devices and this kind of stuff. But just recently, I've checked that you guys are working from the A to Z, since keeping the hive healthy, but also supply chain and even avoiding theft, right? That's quite interesting. That's something that I've learned this week as well, that there's a lot of gangs out there stealing cargo with live bees, right?
That's exactly it. So there's beehives moving around Australia all the time. And even just as recently as just August and into early September, there was about 300,000 beehives moved at the same time into the area up around the Murray River, up near Mildura and those areas, the Riverina. And they're moved in. I'm sure there's some people listening in that love a good almond milk latte or something like that. And they were heading just to that area purely for the purpose of pollinating the almond trees. And the reason that we're interested in that is, if you can imagine bees moving from the entire east coast of Australia down to this one part of Australia, with that, it's very timely given the situation with COVID, but I'm sure you can imagine pests and diseases that relate to bees, where all the bees come together to the one location. Well, guess what? They end up sharing all the same pests and diseases, and that problem that we're facing, and while we're in this situation right now with a lockdown, well, bees have a similar situation of transmission of pests and diseases. So what we want to be able to help with is we want to be able to help with technology solutions where we can help a beekeeper have a really good understanding of the health and well-being of their bees. Now, you might think, well, they're there, they can look at them and they can see them, but that's not quite true. Beekeepers are often only there with their bees every now and again, and might spend weeks without being there with their bees, because they need to go and check out the beehives, basically. So if we can smart enable beehives, we can give them some sort of transparency over what's happening in their hives 24/7. And it's not probably too hard to imagine like that a small device, like this is not my device, but I'm just showing it because it happens to be on my bench, but a small device which can help you with a few key parameters like temperature, humidity, and would you believe acoustics is a really important factor for bees, and also understanding the weight of the hive. We can tell a beekeeper a huge amount about what's going on with their bees. Then if you weave into that some machine learning and the like off the data that we receive, I'm sure you can imagine we can start to help a beekeeper well in advance with the problems that they're facing.
That's awesome, man. Thanks for sharing. And
Yeah.
at first, my impression is that beekeeping was mainly for making honey, right? But that's not necessarily the case. Can you just kind of explain to the audience out there how the day in the life of a bee looks like? What does a beekeeper actually do if it's just not for honey?
That's absolutely right what you're saying, Bernardo, and that is that people do think it's all about the honey, and honey is about $100 million business here in Australia, and you might go $100 million, but the pollination industry in Australia, the industries that rely on honeybee pollination is in excess of $12 billion. Now, that's not saying that bees are contributing $12 billion to our economy, but if they weren't there, maybe there'd be $12 billion less of value created by bees being present. So I'm sure that all of you listening, whether it's because you've had a cup of coffee today or whether you've eaten some fruit or vegetables or some other product, we almost guarantee that you've had the downstream benefit of honeybee pollination already in your day to day. So the idea that bees are just for honey is quite a small and narrow focus, and that's what we need people to realize is there's so much more to the whole story than just that. And like, who doesn't love a good coffee? Not many people. If it wasn't for honeybee pollination of coffee beans, we'd have a real issue there, in that we can still have pollination of coffee, for example, but we wouldn't have the same size of the bean and the same quantity and the same quality as the outcome. So some people can argue that, well, we still could have pollination without the bee. And indeed, that's true, because there are native pollinators as well. But we miss out on a huge opportunity if we are not looking after our honeybees. You said, look, what sort of the day in the life of a beekeeper sort of look like, and sort of what is it that they get up to? And I mean, the truth there is that's going to be completely variable depending on the beekeeper, of course. But if you can think that they, like any primary producer, have a seasonal element to their job. So there's going to be different things happening right across the year. And that could be at this time of year, beekeepers are busy. Beekeepers are going from pollination opportunity to another pollination opportunity, constantly aware and keeping track of what's happening across huge landscapes, so that they can be keeping familiar with where they should then send their bees next. Because whilst they know when they need to be somewhere for pollination, it's not so easy to always pick and understand exactly where you need to be for honey production. So a beekeeper will be having multiple loads of bees, some going towards pollination, some going towards honey, and often crisscrossing the entire southeast of Australia, for example, trying to get the most out of their bees. But at the same time, because maybe the statement I just made sounds a little bit like we're exploiting bees, but I can tell you nothing more that beekeepers care deeply about their bees, and that's why we feel like we've got something meaningful to offer them. Getting that transparency over how their bees are going means that they can provide even more care and be more accurate in what they do to help their bees. Less about fine tuning for production, but more about fine tuning for health and well-being outcomes. And every beekeeper knows that if you're looking after the health and well-being of your bees, the downstream effect of that is you will have more honey, or you'll have healthier bees that provide better pollination services. So it's good news anyway. There's a lot that happens in the day in the life of a beekeeper. Very practical and manual. It's probably worth mentioning that as well.
Yeah, that's awesome, Simon. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that a hive, at least the bees within a hive, seems to be quite fragile, right? So it seems that any major change in the environment might be detrimental to the health of that specific beehive. Could you just talk a little bit more on the precautions that beekeepers have to take in keeping their hive safe, and what are the external influences that can completely destroy or mitigate the potential of a hive?
Great question, and there are many. And I'm sure that most people watching this would go, I bet he's about to say things that are in our control. And I'm absolutely right about that, because most of the impacts on honeybee populations are human-centric problems that we've created for them. Surprise. And And I suppose thinking about a few of those is one is this idea of moving beehives around, like I explained with the pollination before. If beehives are isolated and not moved around, there would be less transmission of pests and diseases. That would be obvious. For the last, actually, I know we don't. There's an audience here, and maybe they'd like to try and put this onto a comment. I'd be interested to see, but maybe Bernardo, in the short term, you can answer this question for me on behalf of everybody. And these statistics are out of the US, but of the beehives in the United States, how many beehives did not survive last winter? So before you answer that, Bernardo, maybe just some people want to have a think and maybe put down a percentage comment on how many managed beehives did not survive last Bernardo, but
yeah.
I've given. What do you think an answer might be there?
So the question is, how many beehives did not survive the last winter in the US, right? That's the question.
Yeah. Have you got any concept of what might seem like a bad number, or a number where you think, that's probably less than ideal? Have a guess.
I don't know. I want to say 80%. I'm being really catastrophic here, but
that sounds devastating.
Yeah.
So 80% is pretty bad, isn't it? But I reckon over 40% is still also catastrophic.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly where it was. It's been over 40% for the last 2 years, and it's been hovering around about the same mark for the last 15 years. And the reason, and that wasn't like that 20, 30, 40 years ago. It was not like that. And that brings me to sort of, well, what next? What happened there to bring that about? And there's still lots of arguments and uncertainty. And there's that idea that there's probably many different factors that have come in to cause this. So some of those are, if you have monocropping farming, if you've got cornfields forever or almond fields forever, if you're trying to grow cotton from one horizon to the next, that does not support a healthy lifestyle for honeybees and other pollinators. They will not be able to survive in that environment. Most likely they will starve. Second to that, if you're applying pesticides and herbicides and other types of products onto those fields, I'm sure you can imagine what the downstream effects are on a tiny insect being exposed to something harmful that's no good for insects. Even down to the point, Bernardo, of you using products in your own home and around your own garden. If you're using those products, the impact of that on bees can be quite surprisingly negative without you realizing or thinking that you're causing such a huge effect. So there's some of the key ones. But this whole idea of transmission of pests and diseases is probably the largest. And here for us in Australia, the biggest one that is of the most concern that we are yet to receive is something called the varroa mite. And the varroa mite is you can see it with your own eyes. A varroa mite is a tiny little mite that lands, that's found on a bee. It's about the size, in equivalent to sort of human standards, it's about the size of your hand on your body. So if you had a mite that big on your shoulder, I don't think you'd be too impressed with that. But these mites get to such large quantities in a beehive, they gorge on the equivalent of blood inside a bee, and it just deteriorates their health really quickly. And Australia is the last place on the planet to have this particular pest and disease. And we're doing I can't really go into details, but some of the work that we're doing is focusing on being able to have early identification of that particular pest. But when our industry faces that sometime in the next 5 or 10 years, we're going to be in a really difficult state. So my other thing, other than technology can help keep our bees healthier and give us better awareness, the other thing is it can help, if we get on top of it now, it can help us when we do experience such devastating pests and diseases. Oh, I should also say, no one missed out on the thought of the fires this last summer. If you destroy millions of hectares of native forests, there are many locations there that bees can no longer forage and beekeepers take their bees to. So that's a huge impact, was this last summer's bushfires on Australian beekeepers. Absolutely devastating, to be totally honest with you. So there are a few of the factors that impact on bees and the beekeeper itself. Just to get you started, and there's many more than just that.
Yeah, man, I'm feeling pretty bad right now after just went through this whole thing. Cause but thanks for sharing. It seems that yes, most of the problems we are facing right now are just a repercussion of our human-centric approach to stuff. And it's fantastic to see that you're trying to develop something to get us closer. Even though I'm not a beekeeper myself. But just by going through this process of learning about hive keepers, I do check your guys' social media, LinkedIn page, and just educating myself about beekeeping. I think it's a fantastic way to have an overview of supply chain, food systems, and it's just fantastic to see how everything is so connected and the impacts that we have. So thanks for sharing me. That's awesome. I just want to ask a little bit more about yourself, actually.
Sure.
Because I'm curious, are you a beekeeper turned software developer, or are you a developer turned apiarist? What's your story? How did you get to like developing software for hives?
So would you believe I'm actually a fireman? So I'm none of the above, really. My main job of earning a living for many, many years now, for about 14 years, is I'm a fireman. And hopefully there's not too many colleagues watching this right now, but like I don't get that excited about that anymore. And I love to serve and I love to do what I can there. But over the last, or about 4 years ago when Hive Keepers started, like I was pretty dissatisfied in that workplace. And when you've got someone who has an entrepreneurial mindset and likes to be busy and like sees opportunities everywhere they look, don't let them get upset or let them get bored, because they'll get up to mischief. Yeah. So for me, it was about focusing that energy and focusing that on something that interested me. And I'd been a beekeeper at that point. I'd been a beekeeper since about the year 2010 on a small scale. So a handful of beehives in the backyard is the typical scenario for me. And really, the idea for hive keepers came to me. We've actually got a whole lot of requirements over record keeping in the industry. Yeah. Even as a small scale beekeeper, just with a handful of beehives, you've got to keep all these records. And for me, the moment of despair that I had was when I was coming back from the apiary one day where the beehives were, and I couldn't find my notebook. In fact, it was a notebook, similar to sort of this thing here. And I didn't know where it was. I'd been diligently keeping my notes. I was about to record what I'd done that day. Couldn't find it anywhere. And when I went back up to the beehives to try and find it, the damn thing was sitting in a puddle of water. I'd been carrying back a crate of all sorts of things, and it must have slipped off the top of the crate and was in the bottom of a puddle. And that was it. I was never going to recover that particular notepad at the time. It was wrecked. And add the dissatisfaction at work and the curious mind and looking for something to do, that was the start of hive keepers for me. And so I'm not a developer, but I can tell you a lot of stories about how I've done the development of an app badly. But we've also got a product to market as well at the same time. But I find that it's easier now to have lots of clever people around me to work with, and we've got a growing team of lots of clever data people and a CTO that's been in the industry of IT for 30 plus years, who's unbelievably clever. And you pull all those people together after initially doing some contract development work, and we can do things very differently now, especially with our hardware side of things. So that's sort of where it grew from. I'm just a beekeeper who got bored, started a company.
That's beautiful, man. Thanks for sharing. And sounds like the perfect match, right? Like a huge mind and some boredom. That's beautiful.
That's what happens, isn't it?
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Thank you so much for sharing. Just have one more question for you. And sure. I just want to tell the audience that if you have any questions, please use the chat. If you're on YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook, I think you can drop either a comment or you can just drop something on the chat. Or you can use our Discord channel as well, or Twitch. So please just drop a comment if you have any questions for Simon. And I'm going to jump to our last question. So maybe just keeping within this area of future of work and future of jobs, right? Because this year we've been talking a lot about how the future is going to look like, how the job market is going to look like in 5 or 10 years from now. And you have a fascinating story, because I think you represent a very specific type of person who is just combining a lot of different interests, is just combining a lot of different skills, be it a little bit of software development, a little bit of industry knowledge, in your case, beekeeping, and a little bit of marketing, networking, you call it soft skills and hard skills, even some IoT as well. nowadays we call someone like you an entrepreneur, most likely, and a CEO or an entrepreneurial person, right? But in the future, I do think that most jobs will be much more horizontal than instead of hyper specialized. And I would like to hear your take on that because I assume that there's a lot of people in the audience out there that they might be feeling quite lost, specifically during this year because their career, they might be facing a barrier in their career, right? Because they might have invested a couple of years in a career in law, defense, engineering, art, you call it, and now it's really the moment to give one step back and ask yourself, but what are my passions? What are my skills? How can I combine everything and kind of make something at the end, right? So I just would like to give your take on that. And if you have any tips for the audience out there on how to get all of these crazy different skills that one might have and combine it to something that they're truly passionate about.
And that's a fascinating question. Wow. There's so many ways that I could go with that. But look, the thing that strikes me first in that is if 2020 hasn't already been disruptive enough, now is exactly the right time just to go, bugger it. I'm going to try something really different. And the year's been ridiculous already. Why don't I just go down a pathway that is new to me or out on a limb and challenging and not be afraid to do that? Look, it doesn't mean that you're not going to fall on your face. Like, let's be real. And I reckon I was only explaining to a group last night, the Melbourne Silicon Beach group, that every time I have a win or a success and I can see someone, Blair's asked a question about how comfortable you're navigating founding a startup. Well, in answer to that, Blair, I think I can answer that with this idea is every time you have a win or a success or a moment of glory, well, guess what? The next challenge gets bigger and bolder and scarier and harder to work through. That's been my reality anyway. And it's not about like what you're trying to achieve at the other end. It's about how you go about the journey. And it's about having the opportunity on a Friday night to sit with people like this and have an interesting conversation. It's about the other entrepreneurs that you meet on the way. If I was only hoping to have an outcome of creating a business that does something for beekeepers and makes their life easier, well, I probably could get there quite quickly. In one respect, that's what I sort of think. But at the same time, I don't think that there would be satisfaction in that. The whole reason I started this was because I needed a challenge. The whole reason I started this was because I was bored with the mundane and the standard way of conducting my life. It was time to try something different. And maybe, just maybe for the listeners right now, it's time for them to try something different. And it comes down to, Bernardo, it comes down to ego. This is like, I can't help but coming back to that idea. People are so tied to their ego and to their past and to their history that maybe if you're listening to this right now, you've got to somehow let go of some of that. And you've got to be able to go, and for me, the classic was, well, I always wanted to be a fireman. Then I became a fireman. And I had a lot of people say to me, I can't believe you want to finish up that and do something else. And whilst I still am a fireman to this day, realistically, you've got to be able to stretch yourself and take yourself, and it's okay to want to do something different. Just because you've spent 4 years at university and then 5 years in a job after that directly related to it, you can go and do something else. It's going to be okay. We live in a pretty impressive place. We have such a great network and support of people around us, especially if you tap into groups like you've got here tonight. And the Melbourne Silicon Beach was another one worth just mentioning, because I think that is like a lot of humble and respectful people. That's what you find in this space. Sadly, Bernardo, you don't always find that with lots of other people out there. You need to find your crew, your group of people that can support you and back you and work with you through the challenges. A lot of Australians aren't always courteous to the person who sticks their head out to have a go. In fact, often it's just they're waiting for you to fall, and that's not always so pleasant. But maybe just now is the time for a lot of people just to have a go. Get out there, put some strategy and some thinking behind it, get some people to challenge you and make you think critically about what it is that you're proposing. I reckon now's the time. Whether it's now, you're probably going to be forced into it anyway, Bernardo, because the first thing you said was, well, what's the future of work going to look like? Wake up, it's changing. The how it's changed since I've been of a professional age for the last 20 years. The amount that it's changed in 20 years is probably how much it's going to change in the next 5 years. I mean, I do believe that. So, like, watch out. If you think you're going to be doing the exact same thing in another 20 years from now, I'd be very careful with that attitude. So get out there, innovate.
Yeah.
I don't want to sound negative when I say all of that, but there's an opportunity right now. Give it a go.
Man, that was beautiful, Simon. Thanks for that. That was awesome. And it sounds like you have a fantastic story around resilience as well, and I would love to hear that. Unfortunately, we're just running a little bit late right now. And dude, thank you so much for joining us. And it's awesome to hear your story. I think we've met a year ago, and since then I've always been checking your stuff on LinkedIn and social media. And the amount of progress that you've made since we've met. I think we've met in a Black Magic event or something like that. And the progress that I could see that you've made, and I know that there's a massive amount of work that is hidden underneath that progress. It's fascinating. So thank you so much for taking the time and joining us here, Simon. And if the audience is looking forward to reach you and find you, where they can find more about Hivekeepers.
Hivekeepers.com is where that is, but at the same time, I'd love to connect with people. So Simon Mildren on LinkedIn is an awesome place to do that. It would be my pleasure to connect with people there. Otherwise, I'm happy to share my email because I love connecting with people. So Simon@hivekeepers.com, that's a pretty easy one. I would love to hear more from an audience like this. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us, man. And I will give you the spotlight to Hans and Locke right now. And thanks, Simon. I'll see you soon, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Very good insights. Okay, so Locke, here we go. Okay, I think that's a great backstory of how you and I met. So I'm going to I actually found the slides. You're gonna have a laugh. So I'd love the audience to see your reaction.
Okay.
Give me 1 second so I can share my screen. So, do you remember this?
I do.
Yes. Can you tell us about this event, please?
So we were invited, and I say we, but we were competing.
Yes.
I was competing against you, Hans. Multiple groups and organizations were invited to hack a van, a Mercedes van, and come up with a way that we could make use, do something to that van to forward our business in some way, shape, or form. I believe you had a mobile makerspace that you were creating.
That was before FAB9. Probably not many people in my team actually know about ProtoWorks. Yeah. That's actually the company that failed. So that's why you don't hear about it.
There you go. and I had a mobile It's really hard to explain actually what we were doing before I talk about 100-story building and what it is we do. So maybe I'll circle back to what our pitch for the Hack My Van was to give it its due.
Cool. No, I thought I'd bring it up. So I actually checked the date of the presentation, 2016, December.
Yeah.
So it's been a few years. There's definitely many obstacles. So not to take this away from you, but this is just the idea at the time. A makerspace that can go into different communities. So instead of the community coming to the makerspace, the van travels to different cities and towns, and do some drones and 3D printing stuff with education. So that was kind of my idea. I actually came last, I think.
But look, this was pre-COVID, and I think an open air makerspace where people can socially distance might have more of a go this time.
Yeah. So Mark, tell us about. Can you just tell us about your story and I guess 100-story building? Because I heard it from you back in 2016. I'm not sure if it has changed since then.
Sure. Okay. So I'm CEO and co-founder of 100-story building, which is we're a not-for-profit a social enterprise that is dedicated to the well-being and future opportunities for children and young people. And we do that through promoting and supporting creative learning, creative thinking skills. and we use storytelling as kind of the main vehicle for doing that. The 100-story building is also a building with 100-story buildings. I'm just going to share my screen here. We are based in Footscray, and here are some of the previous designs. I'm assuming there'll be a few people here familiar with Footscray as an area in Melbourne. I used to be a teacher in Footscray City Primary School. One of the things that really struck me through my early years of teaching was just the challenges that so many of the children kind of presented in feeling confident as creative individuals, seeing themselves as having the skills and the ideas to be creative. And they might not have put it in those terms, but that definitely presented in their engagement in learning, in their descriptions of themselves. And I'd come from a creative arts and communications background. I'd worked in marketing. And I just saw an opportunity with co-founders to do something that brought together our networks and our understandings of creativity and creative process to support and inform the learning of these kids, and just get them excited, like help them have fun with learning. And so we were inspired by an overseas organization that had a creative space created for children to come out of school hours to engage in like story writing programs. And so we sort of followed that idea and engaged with a bunch of local kids, asking them, simple question: what stories do you want to tell, and what's the space we can create together to help tell those stories? And so through that process of co-design and consultation, you can see here some of the things that they came up with. Welcome to 3001. There's a giant slide that comes down from a bed. All these ideas around sort of the environment that helps them get into that creative headspace. Press the black button for a spring to your laptop, so you come down the slide and then bounce up to your laptop so you're ready to write. There's a garden of faces. It's kind of creepy. I don't know actually what that's all about, so we didn't go down that path. But some of the things that these kids were coming up with that were about inspiring themselves: giant domes, very tall buildings. You see a bit of a theme. Another very, very tall building there, going from Earth up to space. Yeah. Lots of rooms: the death room, the building room, portal room. 150 kilogram weight at the front door to drop on baddies, which you have to weigh up the reduction in sort of insurance for security purposes versus the increase in occupational health and safety costs. So we didn't go for that either, or yet. We haven't got it. And there's upside down furniture in that space. So what we did, we pulled all these ideas together. We got a lease on the space in Footscray. I make this sound very simple, but this was like a 2-year process. Got the kids into that space. We're in Nicholson Street Pedestrian Mall. We found this building that looked like just a shop front, like just the one level of a shop front. But we got them to help us co-design this space and went through the process of fitting it out. And we discovered through this process that in the back corner, here you can see sort of the nice creative space that these kids have helped us design. In the back corner behind these guys who are taking part in one of our workshops, you can see a bit of security tape and a notice board. We actually found out we're on level 100. Of a building, not just on the ground floor, but level 100 is the ground floor. In the back corner, there's a trapdoor that goes down to 99 floors underground. It's locked at the moment because there's a jungle growing out from under it, and so we don't send any kids down there. We haven't done for a while. 2020 has been a good year because we haven't been in the building very much at all, but we haven't lost any children. So that's been a good thing. The jungle's now up on the ceiling. A couple of the kids in one of our afternoon programs decided that what might be making the jungle grow was the sounds of stories that were being created on level 100. So they decided to read 2 concurrent different books, and they kept on looking up every now and then to see if they could catch the plants growing. We have a space where we bring children and young people in from initially just the sort of west of Melbourne, but it's become a much broader community over the past few years. And their stories continue to add to and contribute to the space. We don't know what goes on those 99 floors underground because the place is locked, but we have a notice board and a lost and found box. The kids look at the clues from these things and they help contribute to what's going on under there. One of our workshops sort of gets them to look at an object from a level and help us to create the picture of what that space looks like, which means their stories are continually being added to the 100-story building, which means they kind of own it. And they own that story down there and they're sharing that with us. We have a galaxy map on one of the walls that you can see there that there's an infinite number of stories that haven't been told out in deep space. Each one of those dots on the wall might not just be a planet, but might be a whole solar system of its own, or a whole, another galaxy. And so we take them on adventures through space, exploring, discovering new places. There are unlimited stories that they can sort of tell and share for us. Oh, and that's just a bookshelf that you see there. It doesn't open. There's nothing behind. I don't even know why I'm mentioning it. It's not a secret, passageway that goes somewhere else to another trap. It's just a bookshelf. You can see a couple of kids who are still contributing to the stories of what happens underground. And so this space that we created with the children, and created in a way that every child who comes into the space can continue to help us tell the story of it and help create that space, was a real centerpiece for the work that we do. Because basically what we want to do is help break down those creative barriers that children can put up around themselves, around taking creative risks. A lot of the kids that we work with, risk taking, they're smart, right? So they might not be achieving to their potential, and for a number of good reasons. And some of them are internal, because they do not take creative risks. And they don't take it because they've experienced failure in the past, and failure is not a pleasant experience, and it's not something that has served them well in their education environment. So they've learned other strategies to avoid failure, and one of those is avoid taking risks, going for known and safe options. What that does is inhibit their opportunity to learn and to develop. So they put these barriers around themselves. When you look at something that to a child's mind has some like concrete parameters around it, say like numeracy, where they can kind of envisage a right or a wrong answer, they can find themselves, discovering and exploring the learning processes to get to that. But when you ask them to create a story, or to do a piece of art, or to do something that doesn't have those parameters around sort of the expected outcome, then that's where you get the real challenges there. And this is where we try and support them to go beyond that, which is where the trapdoor comes in as just one example of that, because it's locked, it's mundane, it's not a portal to another dimension, it's a trapdoor. There could be 99 floors underground. They can't tell us that there aren't. They can't prove otherwise. And so immediately they're inspired. They can't help but think about what might just be going on under there. If there's a 1% chance that there is something happening down there, then their ideas are sparked. And you can start to see these things bubbling about them. They get drawn to it, which means they start to add in little ideas. And when a teacher is there present, or one of us, we can then use that crack in that wall they put around themselves to kind of try and support them in developing those creative thinking strategies. And so our program runs through a whole bunch of different sort of shapes. Lots of really just hands-on, tangible stuff up until now. We opened in 2013, so the building's 7 years old. We've been running programs for about 10 years. So much of it is about like pen to paper, or creating things, using your hands, using available resources, storytelling that doesn't just look like words on a page, but it's all about the creative process and the thinking process that goes into that. Divergent and convergent thinking, where there's decision-making going on. And you can see that like in this image here, which is the end of a program we ran in partnership with a school, where we had grade 1-2 kids creating a piece of narrative over 2 terms. Grade 2 child worked on for half a year on one story. And then we had a little festival where the families were invited not to read the stories, but to actually read all of the creative process that went in. So these are their story maps. This is all the background information. This is the stuff we want to share with the parents, the decision-making that the kids are making throughout this process. So you have these incredibly complex stories that these grade 2 kids were creating, and the parents are getting to see the actual learning that we're thinking that was taking place during it. And that's the stuff that we're really, really sort of interested in. And we branched out more recently in one of our major programs that we run. We're in a 3-year pilot where We've had a lot of interest over the years in other communities saying, we want to create a 100-story building in our community, in places like Dandenong and Geelong and Broady. And our kind of initial reaction to that was, that sounds like fun. And then the next reaction was, that sounds like an expensive thing that people aren't going to want to fund beyond the first year. And how do we do that? Like, there's an economies of scale issue there. There's also a need factor that we think maybe there's a different need here. What they're after is not the center, but the program around it. Mm-hmm. Our space is great, but as much as we co-designed it, the kids still don't own it 100%, because it's our space. We have to invite them in. We have to put a lot of energy into reach out and invitation. We have 5,000 kids a year visiting our space, but that's just, they can't continue to visit that space. Whereas if we could do that same sort of process with the kids in their own community, helping them create their own creative space, that they then own from there on, and work with the kids and work with the community around the development of a program that's a skills development focus rather than us coming in and running workshops. That seemed to make more sense to us. So we're running a pilot, which is called Story Hubs, where we're working with initially 3 partner schools where they're reimagining the use of an underutilised space in their school. So this school, Meadows Primary in Broadmeadows, it's a community centre that only gets used a couple of days a week. And the kids, over the course of 6 months, co-designed with our team, we discovered some strange happenings, a rift in the time-space continuum in this place. And it seems like that this is actually sort of the terminal transition point between a few different dimensions. And the only folks who know how to keep a handle on what's going on and stop things crossing over from one dimension to another that shouldn't happen are the kids themselves. And so we've created the control panel and systems within this community centre that help them manage the sort of all of that kind of transfer between dimensions. And this is their story hub. And over the past 12 months, we've been working with the staff on professional learning around creative learning, embedding that within all aspects of their curriculum, and working with the kids on program design. What do you want to make? What kind of stories do you want to tell? Let's make those stories. And our idea, once we've created these, we've got a couple of others that we've done, is to then roll this out across a number of other places around the state. Really interesting thing being 2 years into a pilot that's based around physical space during a pandemic that doesn't allow us to be in physical spaces together. So that's one challenge.
So for the stories, how long are the stories? Like,
whatever they are, we kind of treat stories in a very broad kind of fashion. So we don't, like, when we're working with schools, teachers tend to think of in a curriculum focus. Narrative has a very structured shape to it. There's a very Western view that's taken on it as well. So the structure of a narrative, all of the elements that it has, rising action, climax, all of those things. That's what the teachers are trying to teach. What we're trying to teach is not so much those nuts and bolts things, although they're important, but broadening that out and also teaching the thinking skills that go into it. So we use storytelling to actually teach the thinking skills that are important to us. So the creation of the stories themselves can take lots of different shapes. So we have kids working, we do a lot of comic-based work, a lot of visual storytelling. Because we use comics as a great way to, particularly with students who have English as an additional language, they've got a much richer visual vocabulary than they do English vocabulary to begin with. And so you can ask them the question, put your idea down in words, and they go, well, I've got only this many to draw from. So it's not my full idea, but it's the best way I can communicate it with words. Draw it for me. And then you suddenly get like a much richer response. And then that can become a talking point to then draw out the language, to then turn to writing, or turn into a performance, or turn into something else. And so we kind of treat stories in a broad range. And a lot of our stuff is really sort of just happens in the moment too. So it's not about the creation of a thing, although that's important in a lot of ways for us. And then down the other end of the spectrum, we do have very formal programs like one called Early Harvest, which is Australia's only anthology of writing that's not just got children's writing in it, but is curated and developed by an editorial committee of grade 5, 6 kids. So over a full year, we support the editorial committee to make every creative decision around it. They come up with a theme, they commission the pieces, they sometimes commission an adult creator, a storyteller. Sometimes adults have been rejected in the past. The year before, we had Morris Gleitzman, who was at the time the Australian Children's Laureate. We had to hold an extra workshop for the kids to say, like, do we accept his story in here? Because he hasn't quite met the theme and he was a bit late with his submission. They did accept him because it was a commercial decision. They're like, we can put a sticker on the front that says featuring Morris Gleitzman, so we're going to keep his story in there. Hopefully Morris won't watch this recording. But so the kids have creative control, and we support them with professional advice throughout the process, and they create a professional publication. Last year's one, The Sound of the Dark, was came second in the Australian Book Design Awards in the children's fiction section. And we were up against Hardy Grant Egmont, Penguin Random House, and Scholastic, like 3 of the biggest publishers, and 100 Story Building. And the kids had briefed that designer. It was their concept, and it was sort of her execution based on their feedback that almost won that award. So that those kind of projects for us are really important as well, because there's a tangible, real life application. That book gets sold around Australia.
That is wonderful. I think I didn't know about this part. So could you show the audience this particular book?
Let me once again, I'll try and share my screen. And if I do this,
maybe if you have a physical copy as well, Locke.
I don't, because I'm in my house in lockdown. Can you see my screen there? Can you see the ghost appearing on the front cover of The Sound of the Dark?
Sound of the Dark.
Yeah, so that was a book from last year, and the theme was creepy horror. The book this year that is currently in production, the theme is adventure, and if I got a cover here, we've just got the cover. So this is a sneak peek at the cover. It's titled Unboring Exploring. And it's filled with amazing stories written by kids. And they've also commissioned a piece by Sally Morgan, who was like an incredible Australian author. And this is going to be wild. So this is getting released in November. So we do this annually, this publication once a year. So this will be issue 9 of this project. So our programs sort of run across the gamut of like real one-off interactions through to multi-year partnerships with schools. Mm-hmm. We work with about 10 schools on this program each year. So hundreds of kids are involved in this. And so this kind of the nature of the programs go in lots of different ways. And up until very recently, they've all been in person. When COVID hit and schools shut down, the rest of a year just disappeared, and all of our partnership work stopped. And we had to go into a very fast process of, use that great word, pivot. But we had to kind of reevaluate what our program looked like. And it was more about going, well, what is it that we do? It was more about what is the impact we have and that we can have? What are the principles that underlie our approach to our program? Mm-hmm. And how can we take those apart and rebuild them again for delivery in a different mode, and to like unpack, like how does the impact change? How does it change? And then what's the opportunity? Because now we can scale, which we'd never really thought of in the past. We'd always thought of ourselves as a
physical
grassroots
space.
Yeah. And so the physical space has been empty for 6 months. But in the meantime, we've been doing online stuff. So we're using open source, sort of very basic coding program called Twine, which is kind of, you use it to create choose your own adventure stories. So this is one of our holiday workshops. So the kids are co-creating a choose your own adventure story together using Twine. We do our professional learning with teachers, because there's a lot of teachers not in Melbourne, around Australia, who are in the classroom with their kids, and we suddenly can reach them now, which we weren't doing before. So this is a group of teachers in Tasmania.
Do you also talk about storyboards?
All of that stuff, yeah, we do. We play around with and this is about using post-it notes there's modular. You can move them around. You can look at, say, what's the audience experience? What's the next thing that might happen? What could go wrong there? Maybe I'll play around with my choices. We do a lot of that kind of stuff with teachers around. Let's go a step back from just writing, like going, here's my plan. Now I'll write my first draft, to like open up the thinking.
Film and television, they have storyboards. They plan things ahead. They design the ups and downs and the climax and all that drama. And
this is about opening up the creative process. So for kids and for most teachers as well, the creative process is invisible. So you ask a kid, you say, ask them to write a story, or show them a book off the shelf, and they're like, well, I can't write like that. And they don't realize that the author can't write like that either, that there was 2 years of development that led to that book off the shelf. And all of that is invisible, and it's mystical, and we try and demystify that for them. So a lot of what we do is we draw on creative professionals to unpack their creative practice. That doesn't always translate to an education sort of scenario. So then we have to then go, well, here's what, sometimes they can't describe what the creative process is because they just do it. And so we try and go through what the process might be. We pull those things out. We try and reframe them in an education context to support the teacher to understand how they can teach that part of the process, and then understand the learning that's happening in it and assess that learning. So we try and make all of that visible. And through that, what we're kind of essentially hoping to do is engage the kids in just, once you get it, right, it's a far more engaging thing than going, oh, I don't understand. It's kind of too scary. They're engaged. They understand. They can try things out. That there's no one path to doing this. The teachers are interested and excited about it. They're going through a creative process themselves and opening that up and modeling to the kids. Usually they feel like they have to be the creative expert. We put the teachers in that position of going on the journey with the kids and going, I don't know the answer, so I'm going to try this out, like opening up their thinking. And once you do that, then you start to get kids like actually creating and doing it through not just in writing, but in science, sort of applying that same critical and creative thinking process in STEM subjects where they're actually like feeling allowed to try things out, not just, do the plan as it's set out for them. So yeah, it can be really exciting.
Wonderful. Thank you, Locke, for sharing, and I know you're very passionate about this, and I hear the same passion as I did in 2016. Yeah, so that's wonderful. For our audience, are there anything that you want them to do or follow you? If you want to find out more information about 100-story building, what is your website?
So 100story building.org. So it's the story without the E. Okay. .org.au. Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn too. Love to hear from folks. I mean, here's a couple of things. I know there's a whole group of makers of all different stripes watching, and that Story Hubs program that I described earlier. We don't know what the future of that is because of COVID, but it's actually sort of quite exciting as well because we're in a bit of it's a pilot, so we are reimagining what it could look like.
Yeah.
But there's definitely something around whether it's physical space or the creation of something else along those lines, like the van or other things. We worked with a set designer for those first 3 pilot spaces that we made. So she came in, she kind of took the kids' ideas, helped them put it into action. That's going to be the case again for the next kind of stage of rollout. We've got one in Geelong that will be opening up next year, and then beyond that, we're hoping to roll out more hubs across Victoria. And we want to work with creative professionals who are interested in working with kids on development of a creative idea and then making it whatever it needs to look like. And going through that process of going like, cool, your concept is underwater. We can't fill this room with water. So how do we interpret that concept as creatively as possible with the resources that we have and actually like have a really good play with it? So if there's anybody interested in the potential for being a part of that kind of thing, love to hear from you. We also, our space in Footscray, we are hoping once we are back in there, because we do hope to go back in there one day, where we want to revitalise it. And once again, that's about having creative folks who want to come into a space and have a play. And we've worked with some really interesting folks in the past who've just sort of walked in wanting to sort of make something, whether it's in the window or do a mural or, I do 3D printing, sit them down with a group of kids and just throw ideas around and we see what comes out of it. And I'm always keen to hear from folks around that.
Wonderful. Bernardo, do you see any questions from the audience? Maybe because I'm just going to open it up.
Let me take a quick look. I don't see anything right now on YouTube. If anyone has a question, please just drop it in the comments. Just let me check the other platforms as well. I think we just gave an amazing presentation, Locke, so no questions.
Yeah, well, the time just flew by.
Sorry, I talk a lot.
That was awesome.
You got me thinking there. It's like, yeah, it's interesting, very interesting. Wonderful, because people do really interesting things in Footscray, right?
That's a nice wrap. I like that. It's true.
Yeah, there's also a skunk space.
Skunk Control. Those guys have done some. We've worked with them. They've done some really cool things for us. And they've worked really well with it. They created a machine that one of my facilitators had to sit in for hours on end, interacting with kids. I don't even know how to describe it. Skunk Control guys are awesome.
Yeah. And I think more and more artists and makers are moving towards the West from places like, Collingwood and places that now, the developers are trying to build apartments, right? So it's quite interesting trends. So the West is definitely what's happening. That's what's really happening right now with especially artists, makers, artisans. It's quite exciting. Okay,
we just have one question from. Oh, it's not a question. Oh yeah, we got one question from our own Riley. Not sure if you guys met Riley. She's our lead technician. Thanks for joining, Riley.
It's Riley.
So
Riley should jump on the call.
So yeah, she has a question for you, Locke. Mm-hmm. Through your online workshops, do you find engagement with a wider community outside of Footscray or Victoria?
Yes, but only as wide as our little megaphone can reach to. So we do with the teacher professional learning in particular. That's where because we can engage with sort of networks in that way, and so we've worked with teachers in Queensland and Tassie. With our school-based workshops, that's the next part of the process for us. So we're looking at how we can engage with schools in other states, and the beginning of that is understanding sort of differences in needs around curriculum focuses and professional learning requirements for teachers and all those sorts of things. In the meantime, we're working on development of creative program that we hope to engage with schools sort of across Australia with in the next year. So it's really exciting for us. And it is a different thing to us working in person with the kids. It's different for our program team. Most of them are share houses, bedrooms, as opposed to in a classroom with a group of kids or at a 100-story building. So there's a lot of things that are different about it, but it does open up so much opportunity for us.
Thank you, Locke. Wonderful presentation, and just a lot of content, which is quite exciting. And I think you said the book is coming out this year.
Yeah, keep your eyes open for unboring exploring. But in the meantime, go to our website and you can pick up a copy of Sound of the Dark, which is just an incredible read, only if you're brave enough. It is cool.
Wonderful. All right. So I think that's about it. That concludes our show and tell. It's just 2 minutes past 7. Simon, do you want to just unmute and do you want to say a few more words with the audience?
I thought I was thinking over the last 20 minutes or so, maybe I've left people hanging and concerned and anxious about the plight of the doom facing the honeybee. So I can't help myself but give a few tips. And I did this, Bernardo, you might remember on LinkedIn over the last month or so, some tips about how, not everyone should go and keep bees. That's really important. Most people probably shouldn't become a beekeeper or even just have one bee hive in their backyard. But there's still a huge amount you can do. So whether that's planting more flowers or not getting so precious about the flowers and the few weeds that grow in your garden that you don't really want, or the bit of grass which happens to get a bit long, there's so many things living in there and enjoy. And it's not just honeybees, but it's the native pollinators as well. And I do stress, people need to be really aware about how they go spraying bug spray and the like around, and not being aware of the downstream impact of that. And my last one for you, Hans, is that right now, these warm days in spring that we're experiencing here in Melbourne, bees swarm and leave their beehive and go and find a new home. It's completely normal. And I've had a friend messaging me while we've been talking saying, there's all these bees on my front yard. What should I do? And people freak out and get really anxious and worried about that. They are at their most, they look fierce and frightening, but bees are at their most placid when they're swarming. That probably doesn't sound right. But please make sure, rather than ringing an exterminator, you try and find a beekeeper. Get a beekeeper to come out and look after those bees, and perhaps do that through your local council. That's been plenty. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Locke. Wonderful conversations tonight. I personally learned a lot. So thank you for participating. I'm sure there's more stories to be told, right, Locke?
I think, and look, I just thank you, Simon, for validating my neglect of my garden.
Fine.
I'm going to let that grass grow.
And that pleases me so much to hear that. Well done.
Awesome.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, guys. That's a wrap. And thank you so much for everyone who is watching right now. Make sure to drop a comment and share your love for Simon and Locke. If you guys want to find them on LinkedIn, YouTube, or anything, hivekeepers.com. I think that's it. And 100storybuilding.org.au. That's it, right? Beautiful. So thank you so much, Simon. Thank you so much, Locke. And that's it. That's our show and tell. If you want to learn more about us, just check us out, FAB9.
Yeah, comment, and share. So first Friday, next one is in November.
That's it.
Thanks
Thank you
all.
so much, everyone. Happy Friday.